Hello, my name's Cathy MacPhail and I am the author of Out of the Depths, which I'm delighted to say has been shortlisted for the Scottish Children's Book Award. I'm going to tell you a little bit about how I got the idea for this book. I was asked by a school in Edinburgh, Tynecastle High, to give them a first line for a short story competition they were having. And the first line I gave them was, "I saw my teacher in the queue at Tesco's last Christmas. I was surprised to see her. She'd been dead for 6 months." And I forgot about it until I went back to the school. And when I went back to the school, the teachers and the pupils were all saying, "Are you going to write a story with that as the first line?" And this is the book that came out of that first line. Rain battered against the stained glass windows. Mist cloaked the stark trees in the grounds and hung over the lake. I left the classroom assuring Mr. O'Hara that I knew where to go. I'd never been in the school library, but I had passed it on the way to other classes. I was rather pleased that he'd asked me out of the whole class to run this errand for him. I barely glanced at the statues as I passed them on my way up the corridor. In fact, it wasn't until I reached the upper floor that I even thought about them. But it was darker here, and the stained glass sent shafts of eerie green and red lights along the floor and up the walls. The only sounds I could hear were my own footsteps. It's a curse having an imagination like mine. I tried to push it down, stifle it, lock it in that box again, determined only to concentrate on the library door at the end of the corridor. The library seemed to be guarded by the statue of a long-dead cardinal, his hands clasped around a Bible. "Pray for me," I thought as I passed him, for I felt as if the dark grey day was closing in on me. I knocked on the door, but there was no answer. Finally, I pushed it open and stepped inside. Here in the library, there were more wooden pillars lining the walls, holding up the ornate ceiling. "Mrs. Devoy?" I called out for the librarian, and my voice seemed to echo into the high roof. There was no answer. There was no one but me in the library. The books Mr. O'Hara had asked me to collect were on a table by the door, just as he'd said. I picked them up, but I didn't want to take them without letting Mrs. Devoy know I'd been there. I walked between the bookshelves to the study room at the back of the library. I pushed open the door. "Mrs. Devoy, you know when her room is empty, don't you? You know when there was no one but you there. No one but me." The library grew darker. Heavy grey clouds seemed to settle themselves in the sky. The wind whined through the old windows. No statues, at least in here, I thought. Only wooden bookshelves and stacks of books and pillars that stretched to the ceiling. Carved at the top of each pillar was an angel, some praying and looking up to heaven, others gazing down to earth, some with fingers twined and yet others with their hands held open. I looked up to the top of one pillar. This angel seemed to be watching the door, as if she too was waiting for Mrs. Devoy to come back. Her hands were held together, fingers linked. There was a footstep in the corridor. I was sure I heard it, Mrs. Devoy perhaps, on her way here. I looked quickly at the door, waiting for it to open and the librarian to step inside laden with books, the only way I ever saw her. No one came in. The door stayed shut. There was no other sound. And after a moment, I looked back to the angel, and she was staring at me. At me. This wasn't a mistake. She was looking right at me. Her blank eyes seemed alive, and her hands were no longer linked in prayer. They were open. Her fingers stretched towards me. I began to tremble. It seemed the library was growing darker by the second, and I turned my eyes, my terrified eyes, on the angels at the top of each of the pillars. They were all looking at me. Every angel eye had searched me out. Every angel eye was watching me.